Just moments ago, we're not sure what exactly is being blown up here. Clearly, it is an explosion of some sort, presumably the result of NATO airstrikes, either missiles or bombs. We know that Novi Sad is one of the most populous cities in Yugoslavia.
Italy will be transloaded onto C-130s, NATO C-130s, and forward shipped to Albania. From there is really the hard part, and that's when it'll be loaded on the trucks and it'll go out to the border towns where most of these refugees are located.
Each 747 holds about 70,000 of the more than 1 million meals en route to the Balkans. Large tents and meals are also leaving from the Travis Air Force Base in California, all part of the 100...
Respondent Chris Black.
The Clinton administration continues to say it will not send U.S. ground troops into Kosovo, despite rising public acceptance of the idea.
As we have repeated over and over again, the president has no plans or intentions for ground forces in a non-permissive environment.
Two recent polls show a majority of Americans now favor the use of ground forces, and sentiment in Western Europe is also growing. But pollsters say the increased support for the idea of ground troops may reflect sympathy for the plight of the ethnic Albanian refugees.
It's possible that some people are thinking that the ground troops will face almost no casualties, as happened in the Persian Gulf. And the tripwire for the administration may be that as they see support for ground troops growing, that may only be ground troops with no casualties.
And some argue airstrikes are not enough to defeat Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic.
I don't think...
Division and defeat. Is Kosovo another Vietnam? It is another massive commitment to a conflict in a faraway place, and certainly some of the images overlap. There were Americans in captivity then and now. The domino theory was invoked then and now. There was a concentrated use of air power and a reluctance to use ground troops then and now.
We tried to bomb the communists into submission. And one of the things that's similar is it doesn't seem to be working.
In Vietnam, the U.S. ramped up its military commitment slowly. A former defense secretary sees a similar pattern in Kosovo.
There is always a risk in gradualism. It pacifies the hesitant and the tentative. What it doesn't do is shock and awe and alter the calculations of the people you're dealing with.
The U.S. had trouble extricating itself from Vietnam, and some predict the same in the Balkans.
In Vietnam, we had actually a somewhat more clear goal about what victory would mean, protecting the South Vietnamese government from communist infiltration and attack. In this case, we haven't even been that specific, so here we're actually doing a worse job of developing an exit strategy than we did in Vietnam.
Senator Chuck Robb, who served in Vietnam, cautions that in many respects, Kosovo is not comparable.
The most important difference here is with NATO, with the unity and the firepower of NATO, the vested interest in an operation that's taking place right in their backyard, and a far more sophisticated weaponry that is far more devastating to Milosevic than anything we're able to bring to bear on Ho Chi Minh.
Demonstration
against a possible move by North Korea. After using scores of cruise missiles in Iraq and Yugoslavia, the Air Force finds itself down to about 100 in its inventory. As the conflict in Kosovo continues, Pentagon planners find themselves juggling people, military assets, and inventories. Some in Congress are worried.
Supposing then Saddam decides to do something, fire some missiles somewhere, and we get a good force there, or the North invades the South in Korea. We couldn't possibly conduct 3 operations simultaneously.
Actually, Pentagon officials say they could conduct 3 operations at once, and they say they do not believe resources are spread too thin.
So over time, it will take a little bit of a toll, I think, but the way we're handling the forces and moving the forces around, we have the capability to cover all the regions as we speak today.
Some analysts say there is a problem, but it's in the details, not in the big picture.
We need to spend a little less money getting ready to build futuristic weapons when we're already so far ahead of the rest of the world in our weapons technology. Spend a little more money, not only on people, but also on the spare parts and other things to keep current equipment operational.
Pentagon officials say they are too busy with airstrikes and humanitarian relief to estimate what Kosovo is costing. but it's going to be in the billions of dollars. Congress comes back to town next week. The administration will soon have to ask it for more money.
The situation and into Macedonia and into safety, and they said they'd gone. Do you know where they've been sent to?
No, we don't, is the short answer. What's happened overnight is that we've continued to construct both here and about 3 kilometers away, working through the night, sanitation, tentage and so forth. But we too heard that the border was fairly empty this morning. We're now hearing that it is empty. Overnight we know that 120 buses plus went south. I'm not sure where. What we don't know is whether the border will fill up again. And that's obviously what's my major concern at the moment, because we don't want to know how many more people are going to come in here.
So what are you doing for those people who are there?
Well, we're doing what we've done now for about the last 3 or 4 days. I'm sure you're aware of the background to all of this, but it's essentially NATO has built this place, and effectively at the moment we are running it. And therefore what we're doing is with, I have to say, UNHCR, a couple of particular guys on the ground who've been fantastic, and the World Food Programme man, single man who I know on the ground. I know there are other people working within Skopje in the warehouse there. We're feeding them, sustaining them in all aspects of life support. What's particularly worrying me today, it's going to be hot today I suspect, is sanitation.
Indeed, and of course that's when disease starts to spread. We know that British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook was saying to us this morning here on Sunrise that the best thing to do is try and tackle the problem in the Balkans. Don't take the refugees away. Having been there, is that your gut reaction too?
It's not for me to comment whether the Foreign Secretary's got it right or not. What I'm here to do is to look after these people. And these people who are here around me have over the last 3 days become our family, and we want to make sure they're looked after. Where they go from here is other people's business, frankly. And
half dozen atrocities of which we have received reports for the most recent 24-hour period ending at 1800 hours only yesterday. In that single day, we received 6 reports of killings in Kosovo, including reports of a mass execution at Pastrik, in the bottom left corner, and also the execution of 35 civilians at Sopi, slightly to the top right of Pastrik. This is on top of the long charge sheet of war crimes which have been notched up by Milosevic's forces in the past 2 weeks.
300-mile range. The rockets, it carries 76 of those rockets. The gun that it has on the nose, it can fire over 600 rounds a minute. So it's a huge, hugely capable system, and that there isn't a single piece of Serbian armoured vehicle that can withstand the Hellfire missile.
I know you said they can be protected, but of course to those of us who are not militarily minded, they do look terribly vulnerable.
Well, they do, don't they, because they look like little wasps. But if I can tell you that I've had the opportunity of flying the aircraft. When you're sitting in the cockpit, you're surrounded by plexiglass, which can withstand a very large anti-aircraft shell. All the aircraft, it's very small and very thin in shape. It's designed to be difficult to shoot at. It's got a lot of self-defense equipment. Really nothing can get within about 8 kilometers of it, and they fly in...
On this earlier today, and most of the targets they've been aiming for have been hit in the last few days. Now, US Secretary of State William Cohen in Brussels to meet with the Secretary General of NATO, Javier Solana, and also get a briefing from military commanders on the status of the operation so far. And he said that the offer from President Milosevic, he didn't know the reasons why he would offer a ceasefire, but he said he guessed that would be because President Milosevic is going to...
We will continue to assist our partners. Professional scrutiny. It shows Serbian armoured vehicles in Kosovo which have been confirmed to be heavily damaged or destroyed in previous attacks. Moving to my next slide, and it'll be a little easier to see the damage in this one. Shown here is the imagery of the Belgrade militia hangar facility. This image is before our attack, and the next one is after our attack. The next image is a pre-strike assessment of Pristina airfield. And if you look very closely, you will see operational Serbian MiG aircraft on the parking aprons and taxiways. The next image shows the same area of Pristina airfield after our attack. An attack which you will note added at least 3 more MiG aircraft to our total claims, plus other damage to the airfield.
They won't bend. But Milosevic's try-on with a unilateral ceasefire is interpreted as the first sign that he's now looking for a way out. Michael Sullivan, Sky News.
Europe since the Second World War, the exodus of thousands of ethnic Albanians from the Serbian province of Kosovo, deported by Slobodan Milosevic's brutal Serbian security forces, or are they fleeing from the bombs and missiles of the world's biggest military alliance? And where?
NATO member states is arriving by the hour. Tents, blankets, medicine and food are distributed in the refugee camps in Macedonia, Albania and Montenegro. But aid alone is not enough. The camps are overflowing and most of the refugees are sick or malnourished. The evacuation started on Monday when a plane filled with Kosovo Albanians landed at Korlu Air Base in Turkey.
It's a VJ Army barracks in southern Serbia. As you can see here, the 4 major buildings of that barracks surrounding what is a heliport. The H in the middle is a heliport. There are civilian populated areas in very close proximity to that target. And as you know, we do a tremendous amount of target planning and work on that target with some very sophisticated planning tools and are very, very, very careful on our collateral damage. It's one of the important areas that we watch in all our planning. But you can see the before picture of that particular barracks area and then the after. Next slide, or chart. As you can see, significant damage on all 4 of those buildings. You might call that significant damage. I'd probably call it destroyed. The heliport area itself has been covered, probably rendered unusable, at least temporarily. And you can also see that there has been no damage to the civilian area that's very close. Next chart.
The civilian area is in terms of...
It looked to me like it was within about 100 meters or so.
Forces have attack helicopters, similar, and there's the after picture, the main hangar and maintenance facility basically burnt out and destroyed. So there is, from the NATO point of view, quiet satisfaction about the way things have gone over the last 48 hours. Here we are seeing another airfield just outside Pristina with some fighter bombers, and basically those were attacked and 3 destroyed on the ground.
As the heaviest night of bombing so far. NATO said 439 sorties were flown and Serb armoured units were hit for the first time. But the Serbs are saying that one of the targets bombed was a school.
10 cities set up by NATO troops in Macedonia filled up with refugees today, but thousands have been bussed against their will into neighbouring Albania, leaving behind friends, relatives and treasured possessions. And still more have disappeared inside Kosovo itself.
And as the Albanian authorities continue to struggle with the new influx, its border with Kosovo was closed by the Serbs. The Macedonian frontier is also closed, and NATO says it fears for the safety of anyone still inside Kosovo.
It's for a field hospital, but they haven't yet received clearance to move off, so its construction just outside the port of Durrës will have to wait until then. Not that there's any shortage of relief vehicles already on the main roads. The highways here are at best dilapidated, and their capacity, like Albania's ability to receive more refugees, is stretched to the limit.
9 civilians have allegedly been killed by the air raids, 15 wounded. One man told me, if this is democracy, then the word is not in my vocabulary. A woman screamed at me from a balcony, "You are animals, I hate your government." Across town, NATO had scored a direct hit on the cemetery. At least 20 graves were severely damaged. A massive crater gouged into the earth where 5 or 6 graves had been. They were obliterated. At dark, the siren sounded again. The city, in darkness, waited for the next wave. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Pristina.
Will be any less severe than those of the last 24 hours, when more than 400 NATO sorties were flown.
Our pilots are fired up, mentally, physically, and tactically prepared to go.
Here in satellite-enhanced imagery obtained by Moneyline, NATO said it spotted a row of Soviet-designed MiG fighter jets and destroyed them. This, NATO says, was a militia hangar in Belgrade, heavily damaged. And this was a Serb army barracks, also hit. But NATO said Serb forces were holding their ground at several strongholds in western Kosovo, still firing at Allied planes, although without success. Washington said Serb military offensives continued despite Tuesday's ceasefire announcement. And journalists got their first look at the damage in Pristina.
The Pristina center itself and the outskirts, I have to say, appear like a ghost town. There is hardly anybody on the streets of any ethnic origin.
In Pristina, Serb authorities said they had found 10 bodies in the rubble and were still searching for more. Peter Weil, CNN Financial News, New York.
And so forth. We're seeing here test video of the BL-755 cluster bomb being dropped. This is the weapon being used by the Harriers and Tornadoes in Kosovo. Yes, it is not as precise as a laser-guided bomb. Laser-guided bomb, you can, everything going well, pick a window, whatever. With a weapon like this, you have 147 separate grenades, in effect, covering an area about 100 meters by 50. But if you are going after armor formations, artillery targets in the field, assuming it's not close to towns or refugee areas, then it's the, as it were, the weapon of choice. So they have stressed they are only using these area weapons, cluster bombs, where they are convinced there is no chance of collateral damage.
Now, in the last half hour, an advisor to Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic has said that
from forces against Belgrade is our
in the Adriatic, so it's probably safe to assume that it was bombs dropped by planes, but at this time there is no confirmation on the side of the Yugoslav authorities, Lou.
And this building, we're told, Alessio, the pictures that we're looking at near the Central Railroad facility in Belgrade. And Alessio, we appreciate you bringing us up to date. We will continue.
Killers and aircraft armed with cluster bombs against Serb troops in the field.
This was our first major breakthrough against armored forces in the field. We were able to locate and attack several units. In one attack, we were able to drop weapons on a column of between 7 and 12 vehicles.
2 weeks of attacks on oil refineries and fuel depots are finally causing at least some Serb units to run low on fuel. But the Serb army is not giving up, just changing tactics.
What we're seeing is perhaps a hunkering down of those forces.
Long lines of refugees suddenly disappeared from border crossings as the Serbs ordered them back into Kosovo. Why is not clear, but it will have the effect of giving the army civilians to hide behind.
But the battle is...
They're doing it in the name of humanity.
People actually do take their lives in their hands each night. They go out, but they do so because they're part of a disciplined service. They are skilled, they're professional, they're committed. And in this particular conflict, they're fighting for more than just a military objective. They're fighting for decency and humanity in a part of the world that seems to have ignored that.
Not so very long ago, the enemy was just 15 minutes flight time away from here on the other side of the Iron Curtain. There's a bitter irony, according to the Defense Secretary, in using this base, which was developed at the beginning of the Cold War, to fight another war in Europe in the closing year of the 20th century. There are fearful and sleepless nights on site now as families wait 9 hours to hear if crews have returned safely from what is a perilous journey.
7 hours en route, 9 hours in the cockpit total. It is a long sortie, which we're not used to, again, but they're finding it tiring, obviously.
A quick helicopter ride down to Bonn for a Secretary of State who also has his work cut out. German Defense Minister...
So that A-10s were used in a ground attack mode as NATO reported success in hitting troops and vehicles in the field. At the same time, there is word tonight from the Pentagon that there may be a further delay in getting the Apache helicopters that have been requested by the Supreme NATO Commander for use to continue attacks against troops. The helicopters were supposed to be in about 7 to 10 days, but sources now say it may be the end of the month before all the logistics can be worked out for those helicopters and their support troops. The reason these helicopters are so crucial is that they would be used to conduct low-level strikes against forces, and they would be backed up by these ATACMS missiles. These satellite-guided missiles drop cluster munitions over an area to lay down a protective area where the helicopters can then go in and use their laser-guided missiles to attack tanks and troops in the field. But again, it may be another as much as 3 weeks before those helicopters get in place. And we should mention that there was an aircraft shot down over Yugoslavia today, but it was an unmanned reconnaissance aircraft, the kind that the Allies use in order to safely take a look at some of the targeting information that they need to gather. This unmanned vehicle called the Hunter has 2 engines on it. It has no pilot, but it has a television camera that sends real-time images back to commanders so they can take a look at what's going on the battlefield. And as a Pentagon
tank-killing plane known as the Warthog.
Like its namesake, the A-10 Warthog won't win any beauty contests, nor will it win many races. Under 400 miles per hour top speed isn't much to shout about these days. But
when it comes down to battle, I'd rather have an A-10 than anything else flying.
Why the enthusiasm for this slow, homely aircraft more than 2 decades old? Firepower for one. 16,000 pounds of munitions on board each plane. Maverick missiles that can destroy tanks. Sidewinders that can take out planes or helicopters. General purpose bombs to support troops on the ground. Flares to throw off enemy missiles. A Gatling gun firing 70 rounds a second, each able to pierce a tank. The plane's also highly maneuverable, allowing it to fly close to the ground. And as pilots say, it's survivable.
It's got 2 engines. It's got the redundant systems that allow it to fly with no hydraulics. And it's a plane that's going to come home, even after it's been hit.
The Warthog in the past has taken serious hits, lost sections of its wings, and still completed its mission.
During the Gulf War, they certainly proved their worth. They flew 8,000 sorties during the conflict and were responsible for fully half of all equipment losses suffered by the Iraqis.
So, say the Warthog pilots, who cares that their plane isn't sleek and pretty?
And, you know, I love it for that. I don't want to fly a pretty airplane. I want to get down and dirty.
Down and dirty in the Gulf War and now in Yugoslavia. Brian Cabell, CNN, Moody Air Force Base, Georgia.
In times of war, it's the Defense Secretary's primary duty to salute the bravery and skill of the forces who carry out the orders. Tornadoes have flown on bombing missions from RAF Breugen in North Germany ever since Sunday, all of them scoring their hits.
This is what did the damage last night.
They've been attacking bridges, fuel depots and Serb barracks within Kosovo and have been menaced in return by anti-aircraft missiles. As the Defense Secretary told me, the crews can be proud of what they're doing in the name of humanity.
People actually do take their lives in their hands each night. They go out, but they do so because they're part of a disciplined service. They are skilled, they're professional, they're committed. And in this particular conflict, they're fighting for more than just a military objective. They're fighting for decency and humanity in a part of the world that seems to have ignored that.
Not so very long ago, the enemy was just 15 minutes flight time away from here on the other side of the Iron Curtain. There's a bitter irony, according to the Defense Secretary, in using this base, which was developed at the beginning of the Cold War, to fight another war in Europe in the closing year